Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 395 Reigning Over Disobedience and Doubt, Part 5 The Topography of Obedience and How You Achieve Mastery. The podcast objectives are review the 5 primary illustrations of obedience, reveal how we become masters of obedience, analyze the topography of obedience, and reveal how you obtain a spiritual clutch gene. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. They only have themselves to blame. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 183 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we analyze the helmet of salvation, i.e., the piece of our spiritual arsenal, which corresponds to obedience. Along these lines, the helmet of salvation is one of 5 primary illustrations of obedience that we have analyzed in this series. For your reference, I'll recap them at this time. We have the helmet of salvation, which is designed to protect your mind in spiritual warfare and to communicate the strategy for each battle and the way of escape. Then we have the armed guard and watchman to identify every thought that is contrary to the will of Elohim and to cast it out of our minds. Then you have the spiritual converter to provide us with a complete picture of the Father's will so that we always know the next step in our assimilation to the spiritual model of Yahushua Messiah. Next, we have the railway of conformance to prevent anything contrary to the Father's will from occurring in our lives by keeping us in the way of holiness. And last but not least, we have the elastic suit of compliance to align our plans with the Father's plans so we always execute according to his will. From now, the question we should chiefly entertain is, how do you unlock all these amazing features of obedience? The answer, like all others, is found within the word of truth. 2 Thessalonians 3:14 is revealing, and if anyone does not obey our word in this letter, note that one and do not keep company with him, so that he is put to shame. Brothers and sisters, Shaul is very clear in this matter. Shame is a certain cure for disobedience. And yet, despite this fact, disobedience is not only widespread within the extended nation of Israel, but it is growing. It is trending. And to the point where many assemblies within this nation are no better than those within the church circuit. In fact, you could make the argument that some are much worse. Now, the question you should be asking is, how has this come to be? To wit, how are many who have heard the restoration message worse off than those within the church circuit? The answer is sure, and it has to do with the refusal and or neglect to guard the commands of Elohim. Now, along these lines, the panacea of shame is only effective in an environment where obedience is the standard. When the standard is disobedience, the power of shame is diminished, for shame is most prevalent and effective when the disobedient are in the minority. Here lies the inflection and the problem vis-a-vis the standard within the extended nation of Israel is not obedience. Quite the contrary, it is disobedience. And here is what this means for you and me. Those who are guarding the commands of Elohim are more likely to feel shame because our nation is filled with false brothers and sisters who do not fear Elohim. Alas, this is why Yahuwah has led me to make three primary designations of our nation. To wit, you have the dying nation, which consists of all the descendants of Jacob who will never be sealed. They are dying, and many of them are already dead. Then you have the extended nation of Israel, which consists of those who may obtain the seal of Elohim. And then you have the renewed nation, i.e., those who have already been sealed. Here lies the inflection and a great mystery which the Spirit has led me to share. And it is in line with the word of truth, which admonishes us to know those who labor amongst us, because not everyone who claims to be Israel is Israel. Consider this. The dying nation of Israel is larger than the other two illustrations. To wit, there are more men and women in this nation who are beyond salvation than there are who are still in play to obtain the seal of Elohim. Here lies the problem vis-a-vis these hypocrites and dissenters are in many of our assemblies, and in some cases, they are running them. They are the spiritual leaders and advisors. Brothers and sisters, that should tell you everything you need to know. But let me tell you something. When spiritual leaders refuse to guard the commands of Elohim, the entire assembly will fall into disobedience. It's just a matter of time. Trust me, I've not only seen it more often than I would have liked, but I know from experience. My dear friends, I've lived it, and Yahuwah brought me through it. It's the reason why he called me to create Pinnacle of Holiness Ministries. It's because I was a member of an assembly that did not fear Elohim, which was proven by the fact that they were not only walking in disobedience, they took the next false step and began justifying their disobedience. Now, I won't go into the details, and you should not be concerned about them. What you should be concerned about is the disastrous aftermath of assemblies that have been infected with the spiritual disease of disobedience. Consider this and be advised. When disobedience becomes the norm in an assembly, the panacea of shame becomes ineffective. Ergo, there is no spiritual path for the assembly to migrate back into the way of holiness, for they have rejected the primary spiritual impetus for obedience. My dear friends, hear me as I say, this is only one of the many points of no return associated with this quest. Vis-a-vis, many have walked in disobedience for so long that they have opened themselves up to additional degrees of lawlessness, namely deception. And although many are beyond the feeling of shame and godly sorrow, they are a disgrace, and to Yahuwah Elohim, they are a shame. And in the end and after all, they will be filled with sorrow, and they will only have themselves to blame. The mountains of obedience. Now, these things being what they are, I encourage those of you who are being set apart not to be ashamed for walking in obedient faith to the Father's will. Listen to me. Even though the majority are walking in nonconformance and have made disobedience the norm, you must always remember that the renewed nation of Israel is a spiritual assembly wherein dwells righteousness. And thus, even if we are surrounded by the common ruck of dissenters and rebels, do not be led astray, for they are not in the renewed nation of Israel. They are not our people. They are not our brothers and sisters. They are not Israel. Quite the contrary, they are the offspring of the wicked one. I proved this matter long ago at the beginning of this exposition of lawlessness in End Times 302, an Intro to Lawlessness, Part 2, which was posted on July 3rd, 2024. I advise you to review it again if you have the time. Now, we know this matter to be true due to the topography of obedience. If you recall, we analyzed the topography of faith in End Times 355, Maintaining Your Victory Over Doubt, Part 5, which was posted on October 18th, 2024. In that podcast, we determined that faith is symbolic of a forest, and thus the tests and trials we endure related to faith will often feel like we are walking through a forest where there are long stretches void of light. As you learned in that podcast, every primary degree of holiness has a specific topography. Along these lines, the topography of obedience is a range of mountains, which is a natural transition. For in nature, forests do often transition into mountains, and they are found within various mountain ranges. Now, the fact that obedience is symbolic of a mountain range reveals that the model of obedience is more like the overarching model of the pinnacle of holiness than any of its 16 primary degrees. Here is why. Every step we take on the path to perfection is a step of obedient faith that transforms us into the spiritual model of Yahushua Messiah. For this cause, the entire breadth of our journey will be, to some degree, synonymous with climbing a mountain per the precedence of obedience and walking in the dark per the precedence of faith. Trust me, this model of spiritual travel will take some getting used to. And yet, you will never even have that chance if you don't pass the initial test by making it through the leading frames of the mountain of obedience. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, the time will come for you to demonstrate your mastery of obedience. This, my friends, is indeed the moment of truth. And for many, it is the biggest test they will ever take, and they will not pass. Here is why. Your mastery of obedience not only validates your mastery of faith, but it also opens the door for you to reign over disobedience and doubt. Not only this, but your mastery of obedience provides you with the blueprint to reign over the remaining degrees of lawlessness. Not only this, but your mastery of obedience is the beginning of your transformation into the spiritual image and likeness of Yahushua Messiah. Now, I could go on sharing additional dependencies related to your mastery of obedience, but I believe the inflection and the immense challenge associated with this major milestone is clear. Vis-a-vis, there is more at stake at this interval in your quest than any other, and the scriptures support my trust. To wit, the spiritual model of obedient faith is the most pervasive throughout the scriptures. My dear friends, it is the focal premise of scriptural theology. And this is one of the primary reasons why so many will not pass this test. Alas, they will not succeed the mountains of obedience because there is so much at stake, and the pressure of the situation will cause them to fail. Here is why. The only way you can overcome such a tremendous amount of spiritual pressure is by unlocking a key feature of the spirit of Elohim, which manifests itself in the model of a clutch gene. Along these lines, a clutch gene is the source of one's ability to perform at the highest level, even when confronted with the highest degrees of pressure. And seeing as this is the only way you will succeed this and other intervals in your quest, the question of the hour is simply, how do you develop a spiritual clutch gene? Now, in beginning to answer this question, let's first state the obvious. Vis-a-vis, you must be in the Father's will, which means you are being led by his Spirit, which means you are in a good place concerning your ability to do all things through Messiah and according to his will. Now, this may sound simple, but let me tell you something. Fulfilling this requirement on a consistent basis is the hardest thing you will ever do. Not only this, but it is also the most crucial thing you will ever do. Here is why. The foundation of your ability to do all things is your belief that you can do all things. Now, here lies the inflection and the problem. To wit, many don't believe they can do all things according to the Father's will because they are not walking in obedient faith to the Father's will. Ergo, they can do nothing for the simple yet dangerous fact that they do not believe. On the other hand, those who do believe they can do all things are operating in the 7 pillars of our faith. And as it pertains to unlocking your spiritual clutch gene, one pillar stands out above the rest. Enter focus. Now, those of you who have been with us from the very beginning understand the value of the 7 pillars of our faith, which we introduced during our feature week, which ran from December 19th to the 25th of 2021. On day 3 of that week, I specifically addressed the pillar of focus, revealing how it is one of the 3 growth pillars. If you have time, I encourage you to listen to an intro to Pinnacle of Holiness Ministries and our Transformation by Truth podcast. Day 3, a deep dive into our beliefs, part 1, which was posted on December 21st, 2021. In doing so, you will find the following interest point. Along with prayer and fasting, focus is the primary requirement for spiritual growth, for we are at all times increasing towards the point of our focus. Ergo, it is impossible to grow in the Spirit if we are not focused on the Father's will and seeking those things which are above. Now, I get it. This is not a revelatory matter, but it is a crucial matter because the vast majority of believers fail to unlock the power of focus. Ergo, they cannot experience consistent spiritual increase. Here is why this is so devastating. There is no level of stagnation in the spiritual sphere. Therefore, anyone who is not experiencing consistent spiritual increase is by default in regression. Here lies the problem. To wit, it is impossible to unlock the spiritual clutch gene if you are consistently in regression, for you are persistently distracted and you are failing to unlock the power of focus. Trust me, it's a non-starter. Now, that being said, it should be clear how you develop a spiritual clutch gene. Vis-a-vis, you must become a master of spiritual focus. Remember, we are at all times increasing towards the point of our focus. Ergo, if you are focused on Yahuwah's will, you will eventually become a master of his will. It is inevitable. We know this because a true spiritual focus will incite you to do whatever it takes to achieve your goal, which you will always succeed because it is in line with the Father's will. That's the key, my friend, and it's why I continue to emphasize the infinite value of the Father's will. To wit, there is nothing you can't do if you are focused on fulfilling his will and seeking his kingdom. Matthew 6:33 is revealing, but seek first the kingdom of Elohim and his righteousness, and all these shall be added to you. Colossians 3:1-3 is revealing, if then you were raised with Messiah, seek those things which are above, where Messiah is seated at the right hand of Elohim. Mind the matters above, not those on the earth, for you have died, and your life has been hidden with Messiah in Elohim. Now, the critical thread in this verse reveals, if you seek the kingdom of Elohim and his righteousness, all shall be added to you. Vis-a-vis, you will experience the increase you seek, for to add is to increase. You, my friend, just have to stay focused. And trust me, I get it. We live in a world filled with distractions, and thus achieving and maintaining a high level of spiritual focus is a challenge of epic proportion. And in many ways, it is almost impossible. But let me tell you something. It doesn't matter how hard overcoming distractions can be. With Elohim, all things are possible. Just wait and see. For as you maintain your focus on him, you will unlock the spiritual clutch gene. Isaiah 26:3-4 is revealing, the one steadfast of mind you guard in perfect peace, for he trusts in you. Trust in Yahuwah forever, for in Yah is a rock of ages. Now, in line with this verse, the one whose mind is stayed upon Yahuwah and focused on his kingdom and his righteousness is guarded in perfect peace. Brothers and sisters, that is the key to unlocking the spiritual clutch gene. Listen to me. The only way you can perform at the highest level, even when confronted with the highest degrees of pressure, is if you maintain a perfect peace in those high pressure situations. And this is only possible if Yahuwah is guarding you. You'll know because in the most difficult situations, you will not be troubled. Your mind will not grow weary, and your heart will not faint. Quite the contrary, your mind will be at ease, and your heart will be steady. And this feeling will not cease. For while others are panicking and failing miserably in the face of crises, you, my friend, will be kept in perfect peace. Now, do you see why I spent so much time discussing the railway of conformance? Do you understand why I have constantly emphasized the importance of staying in the way of holiness and never forsaking the Father's will? Brothers and sisters, hear me as I say, we will all find ourselves in high pressure, high stakes situations. And the only way we will succeed them is if Yahuwah guards us in perfect peace as we endure our most difficult tests, trials, conflicts, and crises. If he does, the evil day for you will be no different than a good day. As the saying goes, it's all good. Really, it's all good. And if you're not convinced, let me tell you something. When you find yourself in crises that will cause many to experience spiritual shipwreck, and you navigate through these crises with a steady hand and a joyful heart, that's the spiritual clutch gene. When the enemy comes in like a flood and everything appears to be going his way, so much is against you that you don't know what to say. And yet, you find it within your heart to give Elohim the thanks and the praise that is due to his name. And instead of crying about how bad things appear to be, you get down on your knees and you begin to pray, knowing that you are about to see a brighter day. That's the spiritual clutch gene. Now, I could say more, but it's all in his word. Take any of the heroes of faith and consider how they were able to remain cool, calm, and collected in some of the most high stakes situations in the history of our world. And consider how the key to their success was indeed their ability to keep their composure and their eyes on Elohim. Now, I get it. This will not make sense to those who are not in the way of holiness. This analysis will not resonate with those who are not experiencing the spiritual increase that comes when you faithfully walk this scene. And no wonder, for what we have is a peace that surpasses all understanding. What we have is the spiritual clutch gene. Philippians 4:6-8 is revealing. Do not worry at all, but in every matter, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to Elohim. And the peace of Elohim, which surpasses all understanding, shall guard your hearts and minds through Messiah Yahushua. For the rest, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honest, whatever is righteous, whatever is clean, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good report, if there is any virtue and if there is any praise, think on these things. Now, here is the final word. To all who have been to Calvary's fountain, rise you up and ascend this mountain. Brothers and sisters, hear me as I say, this is not some random call to the colors. Quite the contrary. It is the first of many dividing lines we will encounter in our quest on this wise. Along these lines, I have been very clear concerning what is at stake in your war with disobedience. And to put it bluntly, everything is at stake. And for those who don't believe me, let me tell you something. If you are not committed to walking in obedient faith to the will of Elohim and guarding all his commands, you will never be in the renewed nation of Israel. Never. Not only this, but you will get nowhere in your quest. Alas, you will be like the former nation, wandering in a spiritual wilderness year after year and for decades and getting nowhere fast. And you will die in this spiritual wilderness as Yahuwah leads his chosen elect into the renewed promised land. The men and women who reigned over disobedience and guarded each and every command. And thus, I'll say it again, rise up and ascend this mountain. Don't die in the wilderness. Rather, wash you, make you clean. And remember to stay focused on his kingdom, his will, and his righteousness, and harness the power of the spiritual clutch gene. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today. And as always, ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction. And if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Today, I want you to meditate on the word I have shared. There are many crucial matters we covered, and so that is the only assignment for today. Consider these matters and be watchful as you pray. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 395, Reigning Over Disobedience and Doubt, Part 5. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 398, A Summary of Faith, Doubt, Obedience, and Disobedience, Part 1. I'll post this podcast on January 1st, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch. Continue to pray. Continue in fasting. And most of all, continue to be focused. For the end is coming. The end is near.